the land that now is called Israel-Palestine, part of it's Israel, part of it's Palestine, okay? That land, before the Hebrew tribes settled in it, what was it called? Syria? No. Canaan. You've heard that word before, I'm sure. Canaan, okay? It was called Canaan. Canaan was not a country. It was a strip of land that had city-states, okay? Just like in the Middle Ages, there were castles, and the king of the castle had a certain amount of land, and the serfs and the peasantry would work the land, and then the king would pay them enough to feed their families, and then he would take everything else, okay? Well, in the same sense, Canaan was a bunch of city-states. Each city was its own state. So it was not a unified country, okay? The Hebrew slaves got to what we call the Promised Land because Abraham received the promise that they would inherit this land. They got there around 1250. Rough purposes, 1250 BC is when they, after they were released from slavery, they went through the Sinai Desert and they got to the Promised Land. The first mention of an entity called Israel is dated to around 1230. Okay, so that would be the 1230 BC. By that time, there was an entity known as Israel because this Pharaoh, he printed up what's called a stele. It's on metal, and it celebrates the victories of the Pharaoh, all the victories he's won. And in one dated to 1235, the Pharaoh brags that Israel is no more, okay? So he claims that he defeated Israel at that point, all right? So we know the Hebrew tribes were there that early, 12th century BC. Okay, but where were they found? Because here's the thing. I'm going to call it the Holy Land. The word the Holy Land comes from Christian pilgrims who made pilgrimages to Palestine after Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Once that happened, Christian pilgrims would travel to this region because they wanted to visit the places where Jesus actually walked and where he lived and where he conducted his ministry. Okay, they called it the Holy Land because Jesus is holy and that's where everything recorded in the Bible took place. Okay, nobody else called it Holy Land. It were these Christian pilgrims, all right? So first you got Canaan. Once the Hebrew tribes get a foothold in this land, and their first foothold is in the hill country. Now, geographically, moving from east to west, okay, the eastern border of the Holy Land is the Jordan River. The Jordan River flows from the Sea of Galilee all the way down to the Dead Sea. And the area around the Dead Sea is called the Great Rift Valley because it is over 1,000 feet below sea level. Okay, it's the deepest fissure in the earth on the planet. It's right there where the Dead Sea is. Okay? The Sea of Galilee is about 600 feet below sea level, but by the time you get to the Dead Sea, it's more like 1,500 feet below sea level. Okay, so that's the eastern part. Okay, from the eastern border, which is the Jordan River, traveling west, you get into what's called the hill country. from Jericho, for example, which is right on the Jordan River, in the Great Rift Valley, from Jordan to Jerusalem, you climb 2,000 feet. Okay? Right now, there's a freeway there. But you can still see the old road that pilgrims took way back in the Old Testament times. It's still there. And it winds on these enormous desert hills, and were you to fall off, you would be toast, because it's so that the valleys are so deep. Okay, now this hill country, the middle of the Holy Land is all the hill country. From below Jerusalem, Jerusalem is in the hill country, from south of Jerusalem all the way to Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, it's nothing but hills, one after the other. It's amazing to see. I've never seen anything like it anyplace else. Here's a hill, here's a hill, here's a hill, and here's another hill. And it just goes on and on and on like that. Okay? Archaeologists found the remnants of Hebrew villages in this area from the time I mentioned, 1230 BC, and from then on till at least the time of King David. I'll mention him in a second here. And they knew they were Hebrew villages because they found villages of other people too. But they knew the Hebrew villages because there were no pig bones. That would have been a Hebrew village.
Jewish.
Yeah. It's forbidden in the Torah to eat pigs. Because, you see, pigs don't fit into any category that the ancient Hebrews could understand. They could understand, that cattle are like deer, and deer are like certain kinds of other wild animals that have hooves and so forth and antlers. And they all fall into a distinct category. Pigs don't fall into any category that they can figure out. So pigs are an unclean animal, okay? And the same goes for certain kinds of seafood. All right, shrimp, crabs.
Scavengers.
Yeah. What is this? It's not a fish. It's not an animal. It's not a mammal. It's not, what is this thing? Okay? And because it has no category to fall in. Of course, biologists today just call them crustaceans, right? But back then, they didn't have these kind of categories. So it's inedible. It's forbidden food, okay? So, and you can go on and on like that. All right, so when you get out of the hill country, understandably, you're going to now be going down 2,000 feet. You have the coastal plain, all right? All along the Mediterranean coast, it's as flat as a pancake. Gaza, flat as a pancake. And the regions, like where Tel Aviv is and so forth. Close to the coast is the coastal plain. So, to sum it up, going from east to west, you've got the Jordan River Valley, the hill country, and the coastal plain. All right. Going north to south, you've got, now here's where, when you ask, what was the original name of this land? Okay, well, first it was Canaan. Secondly, when the Hebrew tribes got there, the land, they didn't want to call it Canaan, right? Yeah. So it was named after, see, there were 12 tribes, okay? 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes. Each tribe named their portion of the land after their ancestor. So there was Judah, there was Benjamin, there was Ephraim, there was Dan, there was this, there was that, okay? It was so the land was named after each of Jacob's children who made up the 12 tribes. Okay? And that remained the name that people referred to. It was like the antebellum period in American history. People didn't identify as Americans. They identified as Virginians or New Yorkers or people from New Hampshire or Connecticut. They identified with their state. In the same way the Hebrew tribes identified with the part of the land that belonged to that tribe. All right? So it didn't have one name. Eventually, it did get the name of Israel. How did that happen? Because eventually, if you read through the books of Judges and Joshua, or Joshua and Judges, I should say, those two books record all of the wars that those 12 tribes had to fight to hold on to their land. Because others, especially the Philistines, were trying to move in there as well. All right, so they had to fight them off. Okay, it wasn't until King David, and which is why he is so admired by the Jews to this day, it wasn't until King David that all of these enemies were finally defeated. And King David unified all the tribes into one nation. Okay? And that nation became known as Israel because Israel was Jacob's name after God renamed him. Remember that story? He wrestled with the angel, and the angel said, since you wrestled with God, your name will now be Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. All right. So, now that you've got a unified country, you need a capital city. So David decides Jerusalem is the perfect site because there's a little bit of rivalry between the northern tribes and the southern tribes for reasons I'm not entirely aware of, but there was a rivalry there, okay? David came from the south, southern tribes, tribe of Judah. He's sometimes called the Lion of Judah, I believe. Anyway, he picks a site for the capital that is in neutral territory. Okay, it's right between the north and the southern tribes, northern tribes and southern tribes. It's more in with the southern tribes than the northern tribes, but it isn't entirely that far south. All right, that city is the city of Jerusalem. Now, it was originally inhabited by a group known as Jebusites. That was the name of this group. It was just a city-state. All right? How's David going to conquer this city? He picked this city because it's so well defended. It's got 3 deep valleys around it, plus a large city wall around the whole thing. So it's easily defended. Well, that area doesn't get enough rainfall to provide enough water for the residents. So they had a system of large pipes to pipe water, to get water into the city without going outside of the city walls and endangering themselves to attack. All right? So what David does is he takes as much of his army as can get through those pipes, and he ends up in the middle of the city. And nobody knows. The Jebusites are clueless. But all of a sudden, David's there with his army. He conquers Jerusalem, and he returns the Ark of the Covenant from a place called Shiloh, which is where Samuel was. I don't know if you remember. We're going to be talking about him this Sunday. He returns the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Now, what's the Ark of the Covenant? 10 Commandments are in it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, it's a box. Okay? It's got carved angels on top, and it's got 2 poles that stick out on either end. So 4 people can carry it, 2 in the back and 2 in the front, right? And inside the box is the original tablets of the law that Moses received from the hand of God. That's why there's been this long, drawn-out search for the Ark of the Covenant, but nobody knows what happened to it. Now, it could very well be, you know, Solomon put it in the temple when he built it after David was dead. Remember, God said to David, "You're a man of blood, so you can't build the temple." So Solomon builds the temple. He puts the Ark of the Covenant in the temple. Well, the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, and we don't know what happened to it after that. No idea. And since it's illegal for archaeologists to dig under the Temple Mount, because the Israelis, for the sake of peace, have given sovereignty of the Temple Mount to the Muslim community, they do not allow any digging under the Temple Mount. So if it was down there, we can't get to it anyway. All right?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, brought up Episcopalian. I never heard of the Ark of the Covenant until the Indiana Jones movie came out. It's just like, you know, in Christianity, it's just not focused on.
No, it doesn't mean anything in Christianity.
Yeah.
No, it really doesn't. No. Now, when the Apostle Paul, you know, both in Galatians and Romans said, the law is not an instrument of salvation. Faith in Jesus Christ is how salvation happens. The law is irrelevant. You can follow the law if you want. Certainly, the moral law. Now, when I say the law, I'm talking not just the 10 Commandments, but the whole ball of wax, the kosher laws and everything. The moral law, you can certainly, Christians have always considered a guide to proper behavior. But even strict observance of the moral law without faith in Christ doesn't save you, according to Paul. All right? So, anyway, the Ark of the Covenant hasn't gotten a lot of... But you can read a lot about the Ark of the Covenant, starting especially in 1 Samuel and on through from there. And when you get to King David and Solomon, it talks about it too. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, back to the land. Canaan first, named after the Hebrew tribes second, Israel third. Now, before Israel, these people were referred to not as Israelites, but as what? Who were they?
To the Romans, they were Jews.
Yeah, we haven't gotten that far yet. They were called Hebrews. Hebrews, yeah. Okay? They were Hebrews. Once David created this kingdom, which was called actually the Kingdom of David. Now, some people have questioned whether David was a real figure or one of these mythical savior figures that were created by other cultures as well. Well, it just so happens that the archaeologists have found another bit of evidence that solved the issue for good. They found another one of these iron things, okay, where the king of a country to the north of Israel, I forget which one it was, wrote directly on his little stele, defeated the kingdom of David. Now nobody questions whether David was real or not. Yeah. That was the end of that debate. Okay, so so you have Canaan, the tribes, then you've got the name of Israel, okay, which covers all of it. And for the first time, the land promised to Abraham is now fully in the hands of the people who are now called Israelites, not Hebrews anymore. They're Israelites. And it remains in their hands until the kingdoms are destroyed. Real quickly, it doesn't remain Israel for very long, all right? Because Solomon, who was considered the wise king, you ever heard that before? The wisdom of Solomon, you know? Okay, well, he really wasn't all that wise, to be honest with you. He decided, okay, that what David couldn't do, namely turn Jerusalem into this really impressive city with a huge temple, a palace for the king, a neighborhood for the muckety-mucks, the people with money, and then a neighborhood for workers and so forth. Solomon made Jerusalem into a real city. And how did he do it? Where did he get the laborers to do that? Well, he drafted young men from the northern tribes and forced them to do the labor in Jerusalem. So the northern tribes now have a grudge against the southern tribes because Solomon didn't do that to the southern tribes. He just did it to the northern tribes. Now there's a grudge, a major grudge. And the northern tribes tell Solomon finally dies. His son's name was Rehoboam. And the northern elders from the northern tribes come to Rehoboam and they say, you have to stop this impressment of our young men into forced labor, and the military for that matter, as your father Solomon did, or we are going to split into an independent nation. And Rehoboam, who is even dumber than Solomon, said, I'm going to make you work even harder than my father did. And that did it. They split. Now you've got two kingdoms, okay? Now the name of the regions, when it was a unified kingdom, called Israel. The southern area was called Judah, okay? The middle was called Samaria, and the northern was called Galilee. Those are the three regions of the Holy Land. Judah, Samaria, Galilee. The northern kingdom consisted of Samaria and Galilee. The most productive land in all of what we call the Holy Land, or it's had so many names now, you know, Israel, Palestine. So Israel took the middle part and the northern part, and Judah had the southern part. Now you've got two kingdoms, okay? You've got Judah to the south and Israel to the north. So now you can't even call this strip of land Israel anymore because it's split off, okay? The northern kingdom is destroyed by the Assyrians in 721 BC. They are exiled and lost. The 10 lost tribes of Israel were the northern tribes that were exiled by the Assyrians. Now you have Judah left. That's all you've got. Okay? And Jerusalem's in Judah, so Jerusalem was preserved. Okay? Judah lasted until 587 BC, when the Babylonians conquered Judah. Sent the Judeans, whom the Romans, now based on that word, Judean, shortened to Jew. That's where Jew came from, the Romans, okay? The Judeans were sent to Babylon, and that's where they gathered all of these sources which make up the Pentateuch into what we have today, okay? Okay, so that was a lot of information I blurted out in a short period of time. So are there any questions or comments on any of that?
In those days, people who were Hebrew, were they ethnically all the same? Were there any Arabs or other people that were part of that, or was it?
We don't believe. You know, it's possible that when there were slaves in Egypt, the Egyptians had mixed some different ethnic peoples together. That is possible. Yeah, it is possible. Okay, everybody, thanks for coming.
Thank you.